Hey, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the next episode of Rebel, Reject, Create, the video podcast where we dive into the deeper reaches of creativity. And tonight, this afternoon, this morning, my guest is Eszter Szollosi, who is an education specialist who's very involved with learning and development and educational materials, especially in the digital and online environment. So, welcome to the podcast, Eszter.
Hi, David. It's awesome to be here.
Uh, I want to kick off straight away by quoting that Sir Ken Robinson, who reckons that the way we're educated at school pretty much beats creativity out of us. As an educator, how do you feel about that statement?
I so agree. I couldn't agree more.
Mhm,
Um, I think it's like, yeah, it sounds horrible, but it's like slowly beaten out of us.
mm,
Because, when you are a kid and sort of like at the beginning of school, you are sparked to like tell your stories and, bring in your drawings and everything. And then slowly the stories become essays and then they become these like scientific articles that are, they are not as creative as, they could be. Whereas I think that the kid in us always needs to sort of like out that creativity and storytelling and, fun stuff.
right. Now, you're busy in an environment where you deal with people after they finished high school, quite possibly after they finished a different professional training or have been in the workplace for a while. So, how do you how do you deal with that in your training and education programs?
Well, as I said, I just believe that, the child is there in everyone still.
Hmm.
And we all have curiosity. And what I'm trying to do is deal with people with just the sole belief of if I can push the right buttons, they are going to become these like enthusiastic and really curious children. And then so learning doesn't become a priority, but it's more like a means to an end.
Right, right. So, I mean, obviously, you've got the challenge of having to put together learning materials almost on a day-by-day basis. Where do you find the inspiration from to do that? Do you have a specific purpose or a specific routine, or how do you do it?
So this is okay. This is going to be a story where, I sort of start from like the Middle Ages and then at the end we will get there.
Okay.
But I used to be a teacher myself. Um, and I did find that inspiration on a daily basis. And I did get, sort of like this educational high of this like inspiration of like giving high quality material to my students, which was absolutely non-traditional, and then seeing how they, their interest got sparked. So my main mission is sort of to be out there and be able to like not just give it straight to students, but also teach the same kind of inspiration and creativity to experts.
Mm,
Because I think it's totally a thing that we can, yeah, I don't like to say transfer knowledge because it's not some kind of a currency that, we like give to each other or something. But I think it's really possible to also give this inspiration to other people. So that would be my purpose in life and my personal mission. Um, is to sort of go about, giving this inspiration to other people. And how I find it myself is
mm,
um, I am just sort of fine with, not making a 9 to 5 way of thinking. So if I have to develop a course, then I would sort of just like write down whatever I think is going to be the structure and then really like leave myself the space for being inspired, because I have been inspired, I'm gonna like leave out the weirdest places, which we all know. But I have been inspired by Netflix series and board games. And, these are all things that you don't really do in your work time, or like there are very few people who get to do this stuff in their work time. So long story short, I just give myself the time and the space to get inspired and look for ways to get inspired and keep a very open mind. That's also really important.
Right. Yeah, that suspending judgment thing. Yeah.
Everything can be an inspiration and a learning source. And once you sort of get into that mindset, the world becomes a very, very interesting place.
Right. Okay. So how active are you about trying to find those inspirations or those links between the the material you're putting together and these things that are inspiring you? Or is it completely chance? Is it random?
I think it's sort of like, okay, so if I would have like a course to put together, then of course I'm more conscious about like, what sort of extra things I'm doing, or then I choose my Netflix series in a more like elaborate way, let's say. But then there's also like this very fine balance between, letting yourself be inspired and sort of like being conscious about being inspired. And I think this part of like creating a course and this part of education is really an art. Like, if I'm talking about like how I'm letting myself be inspired and stuff like that, I could be a painter because, like I think it's a form of art. And once you like sort of start to look at it that way, then it becomes this like really cool thing of like, okay, I'm not just creating courses, but I'm an artist here who is creating like really fun and nice content.
I like that. I like that. Although I guess, from my point of view, actually, it's just that art is a form of creativity, and so are making courses. So it's actually not really weird if you look at it that way around, that the way you're talking about inspiration and passion is exactly the same. Because that's how we feel when we get into that state of mind, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So apart from being a teacher previously, what is your background? I mean, what has turned you into this person who's so passionate about creating inspiring learning materials?
Um, it really has been my teaching years, honestly. That's the short answer. I don't want to, tell you my whole life story because, parts of it are just really very random, of like me getting a bachelor's degree in business, which is like, I'm far from being a business person. But yeah, when I was teaching at the University of Applied Sciences, a beautiful place in Breda, full of beautiful people and amazing teachers. But I got the feeling that we had it wasn't the resources that were limited, as in like financially or something. It was more, this very rigid machine of the education system that I experienced there, even though this particular place where I was teaching was very open to innovation, but not even close to, how like with close to the pace with which I would have loved to innovate. So I sort of found like basically free ways of bringing like extraordinary material into my class. Like I'm fairly sure I exceeded my printing limit every single year. But it was so much fun to see the students. So that was really the 2 years that inspired me, because I started to teach when I was 23. So I was also really close to my students in age. So I had to work really hard to sort of like, stand my ground and show them like I do have the right to be here. And that got me thinking of like, does it have to be this way? Like, do I have to, fight my way into my students' hearts in this way, or is there any other way? And there was, and I haven't looked back ever since. Like, yeah, I'm always saying, if you are 23 and you find your calling, then you can call yourself a pretty lucky gal. So here I
am. Okay, now, why is this creative approach so important when it comes to education and learning?
It's because, and disclaimer, unpopular opinion might be coming up here. I think that the whole definition associated with the word learning is just fundamentally wrong. Like if you look at the first year of a child's life, do they like consciously learn? Are they constantly, sitting in front of books, or like, learning doesn't work that way. And then we just grow up to learn verse somehow. We just grow up to sort of like associate learning with this picture of like unfun and, sitting in front of an open book kind of experience. And I think that's what should be changed, and that's what's wrong.
Oh, I mean, you remind me of a friend of mine in San Francisco, who is a radical unschooler. So not only does she not send her children to school, but she has no home curriculum. If they express an interest in something and they're getting excited about something, then they spend however long it takes to get to the bottom of that, so the children are happy, they understand it, now they know everything they want to know about it, and then they move on to the next thing. And when I met her kids, the youngest, who was at that stage 4, could already read and write.
Wow.
Yeah, and he had never been to school. He had never been taught anything. He had learned it himself because of his enthusiasm and interest.
Exactly. I mean, that is the driving force, right? It's curiosity, enthusiasm, and interest. And it's like learning is just a means to an end. Once you find like what you are truly, truly passionate about and interested in, you are going to like absorb all the knowledge that's out there up until the point where you feel like, okay, now I have answered, all the questions that I had in me. Oh, and that's another thing that I'm sort of like jumping here and there. But that's another thing, it's sort of like finding and giving the students the questions that you are going to answer, or that your course is going to answer. That's really important. And that's something that education doesn't really give currently. Like, we are trying to do it, like traditional education is trying to do it with learning objectives. But I tried to introduce learning objectives in my own courses, and then my colleagues had to create courses as well. And then they were like, this is so boring, Eszter. We can't create learning objectives because this is not good for anyone. So then we have seen that, if you are asking questions that are so like out there, that the students are going to want the answers to the questions, they are going to be more likely to sort of dive into the course.
Give me an example.
Okay, so for example, if I am developing a basic web development course, and you have zero experience, for like you have never written a line of code in your life,
yeah,
and then I tell you that once you are done with the course, you are going to be able to answer the one single question, how do I develop my own game? And it's so, right? It's so out there that you are like, huh, there's no way you can do that.
Yeah.
And then I, as a course creator, I'm like, just watch me. And then I will give you the steps that lead you up to the point where you are actually going to be able to develop your own game. It's going to be a simple game, you know,
Yeah.
disclaimer.
No,
But
I mean, interesting, because I also put together learning materials, I mean, my own workshops and what have you. And when I'm marketing those, I always have this thing, by the end of this course, you will be able
yeah,
to do the following. So you're saying that that's restrictive and boring and not inspiring enough.
I think it's important for you as a course creator to be aware of that. But I think it can be formulated in a much more, in a much like sexier and much, you know, much more inspiring way than by the end of this course. Because again, learning objectives are used in traditional education. So you have seen like how many in your life already when you have been to school, like by the end of this lesson, you are going to be able to blah, blah, blah.
Oh
And
boy.
then if you're just facing this interesting question, then you're like, oh, I can do that. Okay, nice. So it's a different vibe. It's doing the same thing, but with a different sort of, vibe.
That's very interesting. I'm going to go back to a few of my things and look at that and see if I can come up with the questions. I really like that. All right. So obviously, you know, you're one of these people who you probably might not have said this to anybody, but you've pretty much got creativity on tap. When you need it, it's just there.
It's not true.
Oh,
It's not true. And those are very, like when I don't have the creativity, like when the tap is empty, those are my biggest learning moments, because it's sort of, you know, learning to accept the fact that you are not a robot, that you don't have creativity on tap, and that's fine, because then sort of like opening my mind even more to any possibilities, whereas paying attention to like not becoming desperate for possibilities, that is again a really interesting balance to look for. So no, I don't have it on tap, and I'm so incredibly grateful for not having it on tap,
that's a
because
very
I
interesting.
learned a lot.
So when you're being creative, the flow is going this way. On the days that it's not, the flow is coming this way, which is why next time it'll be able to go back out again.
Yeah.
Ha! I like that as well. All right.
Yeah.
So someone's watched this podcast, this video podcast, and they bump into you in the street. They're like, Eszter, you're very creative. What one thing should I do to make sure that I can actually stand the chance of being as creative as you are? One thing.
Just find your passion. It's, you know, it's like my passion is education. And there are so many experts out there who have their own passion. And I would love to connect with all these experts and, you know, connect our passions and, you know, create something so awesome together, because you don't have to be an education expert. But we have all had, you know, this moment of like sitting in like this big lecture hall or big hall, listening to someone who is an incredibly huge expert of their field, and then sort of like dozing off after the first like 20 minutes. And that's fine, you know. These experts, they just need to find a way to yeah, me saying me is pretty cocky, so I'm not gonna say that. These experts, they just need to find their way to somebody who is passionate about education, so that two experts can come together and then, with combined expertise, create something that is enjoyable and fun to listen to, and also delivers added value.
Eszter, thank you so much for your time and for coming and answering my crazy questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
And for all of you watching, thank you very much. If you enjoyed this interview, please hit the like button. And if you really enjoyed this interview, please hit the subscribe button, because regular episodes of this video podcast come out every 2 weeks. So that way you will not miss out on all the fun. And if you want to support me in my endeavors to continue making these kinds of content about creativity, you can check out the links in the show notes and go and join my Patreon over on patreon.com and become one of my patrons, and contribute a couple of dollars to keeping the flow going on this side of the pipe. Eszter, thanks again. And to you out there, thanks for listening.
Thank you.